Well, I've been a narrative designer in the video game industry for 9 years, and I've always dreamed of writing a story that would stick with players long after they put down the controller. I wanted to create characters that felt real, a story that had heart stakes and choices that actually mattered. When I got hired as senior narrative designer at a big LA AAA studio, I thought I'd finally get the chance to do that. What I didn't know was that my boss, Mark, the creative director, would steal every single bit of it. Mark hired me to lead the narrative for a new open-world IP and told me I had full creative freedom to build the story and characters from scratch. He said he wanted a story that was emotionally resonant with complex characters and meaningful player choices. I poured my entire soul into it. I spent 3 years writing the main story arc, building the 12 main characters, designing the branching narrative system that meant every choice the player made had real consequences, and working with the voice actors to bring the characters to life. I worked 14-hour days, stayed in the office on weekends, missed holidays with my family, and even worked through a bout of COVID because we were up against a critical deadline. I lived and breathed this game for 3 years. Mark never read a single script draft until the game was almost done. He couldn't tell you the difference between a linear story and a branching narrative, but he knew exactly how to talk about creative vision to the studio executives and the media. When the game launched, it was a massive hit. It sold 12 million copies in the first month. Critics called it a narrative masterpiece, and players flooded social media talking about how the story had made them cry, how the characters felt like real people. Then, it was nominated for Best Narrative at the Game Awards, the highest honor for video game writing. Mark accepted the nomination alone. He went to the ceremony in LA, walked on stage when we won, and gave a speech about how he'd envisioned this story from the very beginning, how he built the characters and the world to challenge players and make them feel something, how his creative direction had turned the game into a masterpiece. I sat in the audience in the back row waiting for him to say my name, to acknowledge that I was the one who'd written every line of dialogue, who'd built every character, who designed the entire narrative of the game. He thanked the studio executives for their trust and support. He thanked the development team for their incredible work. He thanked the voice actors for bringing the characters to life. He even thanked the event host for putting on such an amazing show. He never said my name, not once. After the ceremony, he sent a company-wide email that said none of this would be possible without our amazing team, with a picture of him holding the trophy. Like I hadn't spent 3 years of my life building the story that won the award. Like I was just a minor member of the team, not the person who created the entire narrative backbone of the game. I started planning my exit that night. I'd been contacted by a beloved indie game studio a year prior, and I reached back out. They offered me the role of narrative director, a 25% raise, full creative control over their next project, and a cut of the game's profits. I accepted, handed in my 2 weeks' notice, and Mark just scoffed, said the franchise is successful because of the studio's brand, not your story. He had no idea what was coming. What Mark never realized was that the game's success wasn't the graphics or the open world or the studio's brand. It was the story, the characters, the way players felt seen and heard by the narrative I'd written. I left the final script files for the first game, but the sequel's full story bible, the character lore, the entire branching narrative framework walked out the door with me. Mark hired a new narrative team to write the sequel, but development imploded within 6 months. The new team couldn't capture the voice of the characters, the story felt hollow and lifeless, and leaks of the script were torn apart by fans online. The studio pushed the sequel's release date back 3 years, announced massive layoffs, and Mark was fired. He built his reputation on my story, and when I left, it all fell apart.